Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Thursday, September 18th, 2025, and I'm back for another video. This time to talk about the manipulation of information in the internet and different online sources to try to convey a false idea of a reality. This time it's regarding Ukraine and the ethnic Russian areas. So anyway, I found this map that was put on. I'm not too sure the source of it, but anyway, you can see here that the ethnic Ukrainian areas are basically 95% of Ukraine except Crimea. So um, anyway, and then you have a couple of small little sections here and there where there's a plurality of ethnic Russians. So this is to give us the idea that this whole war between Russia and Ukraine, that's about protecting the rights of the ethnic uh, Russian people and ethnic and Russian speakers, is just a false um, propaganda put out by the Kremlin to deceive you and make you think things that aren't really true. So, anyway, if you see this map here, um, there's a couple of small areas. You can see that there's ethnic Romanians and Hungarians. Hungarians are to the west. You have the Romanians, you have the Bulgarians. So, anyway, and this is also to point out that, hey, it's almost the same, between the ethnic Russians and these other ethnic groups. So that's the other conclusion. So they said, well, if Russia could invade Ukraine, then why can't Bulgaria? Why can't Hungary? Why can't the Moldavans? Why can't the Romanians? So basically, this is to belittle the position of Russia about the ethnic Russians in Ukraine. So anyway, I'll show you the next map. So this is to bring in some historical information. So let's take a look at this. Um, so we can see the regions of Ukraine and when they were put together into one whole, what was considered Ukraine up until 2022. So, anyway, you can see what the areas that were added in 1922 from what would have been Russia. Um, you have the Crimea in 54 and basically the oblasts that are the point of contention were added in 1922. The core of Ukraine, which came into existence starting in 1654. You have another chunk that was added to Ukraine there in 1654. So basically, in the 17th century, we had what's green and yellow in this image as Ukraine. And the green part that was the part was taken away from Poland and possibly Hungary, where the ethnic Hungarians are. So anyway, this big chunk of Poland that was added to Ukraine was given at the same time Poland moved west and took German areas. So Poland took a lot more German areas than they lost. But anyway, the Polish people are still angry about losing this area and they want it back eventually. But anyway, we can see the areas that were added to Ukraine in 1922. These could have been partly Ukrainian ethnic areas, but as we understand it, with the Russian speakers and the ethnic Russian people who live there, that this was Russia that was added to Ukraine. So this is what created kind of the whole problem in the first place, merging the Ukrainians with the Russians and trying to force them to live together. Many people said that the Ukrainians and Russians lived together as brothers until the um, until basically the U.S. started to get its nose into Ukrainian matters in the early 90s and started to bring in the USAID, and they sponsored educational programs, which are basically to try to uh, focus the Ukrainian people on creating this Ukrainian identity and push the Ukrainian language. But basically, the point of that eventually was to do kind of an ethnic cleansing of Ukraine to push all the Russians out. And if any Russians wanted to stay, they would have to buy into the whole, uh, Ukraine as a superior race and all that, which the Banderites and those people were pushing, kind of this neo Nazi ideology. So, anyway, if we see this area that is in pink, this is basically going to be the area that will eventually be conquered by Russia if they don't come up with a peace agreement. So we know that the four oblasts are pretty much, um, taken either 100% or 70%. And then they're a little bit into the Kharkiv Oblast. They're a little bit into the Dnipro Petrovsk region, but I don't really know from this image whether this would be a ethnic Russian or ethnic Ukrainian area. In any case, you can see that if Russia and Ukraine could agree to a peace deal, it probably would be now regarding at least the four oblasts plus Crimea and then plus Kharkiv, which is the capital of the Kharkiv Oblast is Kharkiv, and that's the second largest city in Ukraine. So that would be a huge loss for them. And you can see over to the west of Kharkiv, we have the Sumy region and or Oblast, and Sumy uh, has very few ethnic Russians there. So, but in any case, we don't know in the final agreement if Russia's going to want more of a buffer to avoid the NATO setting up missile sites close to the Russian border. So anyway, we don't know how this all would work out. But anyway, you can see that we're starting to see where this where the special military operation will be going if no peace deal will be agreed upon. Then now if we go over to the percentage of ethnic Russians in Ukraine, we get a very high percentage in the four oblast where Russia has already conquered, probably well over 70% of this whole area. Um, they keep on talking about 20% of Ukraine, but Russia never said that they wanted to go into the ethnic Ukrainian areas. So we're really talking about these areas, these ethnic Russian areas in Ukraine. So um, anyway, moving on, we can see the languages in the Ukrainian cities. Uh, the most Russian city was Odessa, with 80% of the people speaking Russian. Kharkiv, close second. And then we have Zaporizhia, Dnipro, Mykolaiv, Chernihiv. So anyway, I would take a line right below Chernihiv and everything above that. That could be another point of resolution of the conflict. But we know that President Zelensky has asked for, I believe, 120 billion, 60 billion per year to try to keep Ukraine afloat until the end of 2026. So we don't really see any light at the end of the tunnel. But the point here is um, that there is a very strong presence of ethnic Russians, and the narrative that they put out is that they're just you can see here the use of the Russian language. This corresponds approximately to the chunk of Ukraine that was added to Ukraine in 1922. So this tells me that these are going to be majority ethnic Russian. So anyway, when they do these statistics, you know that if you have a Russian father and a Ukrainian mother, and you're in Ukraine and you're trying to push the narrative that everyone here is ethnic Ukrainian, well, you're gonna from that family that has a ethnic Russian uh, spouse and ethnic Ukrainian spouse, they're gonna pick the ethnic Ukrainian as the primary uh, ethnicity of that family. So, anyway, you can see here that, again, this corresponds to what the Russian negotiators said is that if they couldn't decide on the peace deal with the four regions, the four oblasts plus Crimea, that in the future they'd be talking about eight. So, but the eight, you can see them in this map. These are the areas that were primarily Russian speakers. So this is a good indication that these were ethnic Russians. And then if you see this other area, you can see that the Ukrainian language dominates those areas. But also in Ukraine, there's Ukrainian dialects. So anyway, they would need to decide on what was the Ukrainian language that would be spoken by all. But if you consider this whole point from the fact that the Russian special military operation entered into Ukraine to protect the ethnic Russians and Russian speakers and their right to choose their language, their religion, and their culture, then we're talking about these areas. So these are areas have the majority of Ukrainian mines that are very valuable. These have the big industrial centers. They have the large, um, this is the economic industrial area of Ukraine, and the other areas of Ukraine are agrarian. So if Ukraine is left with just some agrarian areas, they may wind up to be just a rump state that's not able to finance itself, and it'll continue to need, money from outside. But if it's a neutral state, then the Western countries that wanted to bring in this pseudo NATO EU country into its into its organizations of the EU and NATO, then they're probably not going to want it if they're just going to be sinking money into it right and left. So anyway, finally, um, there was a press release. Here it comes from the Kiev International Institute of Sociology. And here we talk about oppression and persecution of Russian speaking citizens of Ukraine. And then they ask the people what their um, idea of whether these Russians were being persecuted or not. Um, Basically, under 10% of the Ukrainian population thought that the ethnic Russian or Russian speaking citizens were subjected to systematic oppression. So this is a complete this shows the complete manipulation of the Ukrainians. And so this is all about narrative control and about projection of of um, of consensus based around a narrative. So anyway, if if the Ukrainians believe that the Russians have no reason to fight for their rights, then they're much more willing to sign up to join the military or to support the campaign and to stay in Ukraine, because a lot of Ukrainians were abandoning Ukraine because of the war and because of all the things related to mobilization. So, um, but this could also simply be an FSB inspired narrative put out. It's hard to say, but I would believe that most Ukrainians believe that the Russians aren't being persecuted, even though they know that the laws were passed which outlawed, Russian in public, in any kind of public atmosphere, whether it was when in the work or at the store, at the supermarket. They shut down the Russian media. They outlawed the Russian Orthodox Church. So anyway, um, this is a sign that the the Ukrainians in Ukraine are completely uh, controlled by the narratives that are being put out by the government, that there's no reason for the Russians to feel oppressed, that they're not being oppressed, and blah blah blah. So anyway, if we go back here, the main point of this video is that they're trying to put out a narrative about ethnic Russians. How many are there? They've tried to put out the narrative that there really is only a limited number of ethnic Russians, and they're almost a minority, just like some of these other groups. But if you take a look at the map from 1922, when 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 the chunk of Russia was added to Ukraine, you can see these are all the ethnic Russians. So there is a there is a strong presence of ethnic Russians in Ukraine, simply because they moved uh, the border of Ukraine over um, these oblasts, and they added Crimea in 1954. Um, and if you see the ethnicities, that there is a strong percentage, but these numbers could also be skewed depending on how they do the tabulations and who they take into account as far as ethnic Russian, ethnic Ukrainian. And finally, you can see the percentage of the population speaking Russian in some of these cities, which Russia hasn't gotten to yet: Odessa, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro. So these are next up on the list for Russia. Eventually, they will get there and they will become a part of Russia, unless Ukraine decides to make a deal. But we know that they won't make a deal because they've asked for $120 billion to keep them going until the end of 2026. And they even started recruiting a 60-year-old plus individuals into their military so that they can bring wisdom and maybe not speed, maybe not agility, maybe not mental agility, but these people who could be out of a job could find an immediate income, kind of similar. They're trying to follow the same idea of Russia recruiting and making payments for them to join the military, and then monthly payments. But anyway, we will see where this goes. So I'm glad that you're able to join me for this video and to take a look at this really complex situation in Ukraine. But if we go back to some of these narrative creations where they say that there are basically no ethnic Russians in Ukraine, and that the ones are there, if they're not happy, they should go. Um, these are more narrative creations put out by all the NGOs and all these think tanks and all those people who are, quote unquote, joined by the hip with the CIA and the State Department. So, anyway, I encourage everyone to look for the truth on your own and to try to figure out on your own what is the reality that's going on. Don't buy into the narratives that are being put out by the US government, or by from Kiev, or by any of the NATO countries. Certainly, they will come with an extra portion of manipulation and narrative creation. So anyway, I thank you for joining me. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.